what number is this conference? The 16th? Is this the 16th or the 17th conference?
17th.
The 17th annual? What year did it start then? 91?
91.
Perfect. There's a clock up there anyway that I can keep track of, right? Yeah, that's good though.
Because I'm not going to do that countdown. I'm just putting on the
It'll be about 2 hours.
Okay. Anything over.
It could be less. Won't be less than 90, that's for sure.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back this evening. We're about ready to begin with our keynote presentation.
17.
Richard Dolan, I think, is known to most of our audience, but I want to say a few words about it. Richard has become, I think, arguably
Thank you.
the #1 spokesman for our phenomena. Perhaps the #1 researcher, the #1 voice. And I say that not just because of the historical research he has done. That is absolutely unbelievable. I think
That is a
most
cool
people in the room
propaganda.
know of his first book,
World War I
UFOs and the
propaganda.
National Security State.
Yeah.
Now here's the reality. He had planned to have completed the second book, which would have, taken us into the current day, about at least a year ago. But the deeper he delved and the more research he did, he now has determined that the series must be 3 volumes. 3 volumes. So he has promised us, all of us, that UFOs in the National Security State Volume 2 will be done by the end of the year, and we will be able to get it and gift it as a Christmas present for those we love and care about.
Oh, for God's shit.
Yeah, very anxiously awaited. Now, this is not Richard's claim to fame, in my mind. Yes, he is our greatest historian. However, where he shines even beyond this work, I think, is being perhaps our greatest spokesman on what the hell does it all mean? What are the implications of the fact that we are not alone? And after all, this is the heart of all of it. Ladies and gentlemen, Richard Dolan.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you very much. Hello. God. Having fun, I hope. Drink more wine, if you're able to do that. I am just overwhelmed to be here and so honored and privileged to be speaking to this Congress, this international Congress. I certainly want to thank the amazing efforts every year by Bob Brown and his fabulous family. Nikki Irvin, who has become the glue that holds the gears of this conference together. Heather Donnelly, who arranged my travel and probably that of many other people. I would have been standing in the middle of some airport if it had not been for Heather, I'm sure. Marina Diamondhart, a very dear friend of mine who's behind the scenes working hard, making sure this works out nicely. Melanie Lohman, she's back there. Thank you, Melanie, for everything you do. Dakota, who's everywhere he needs to be to put out whatever fire's going on, and everybody else. I'm especially amazed because I'll clue you in on a dark secret of Rich Dolan, which is that I'm a total, complete ditz in every aspect of my personal life. I can't remember anything. I have a son and a daughter. One does Taekwondo, the other does Irish dance. I can't remember who. So when I drive them, I drive the boy to wherever he has to go one night, and we end up at the Irish dance. And he's like, Dad, come on. I said, I'm making one trip tonight. That's it. You have to go in. You're allowed to kick. All right, fine. I can't really. And then with like keys, that's proverbial. But I put keys in one pocket. And 5 minutes later, I'm like, where the hell? This is so oh, wait, it's in this pocket now. Why? So to do a conference every year, like clockwork, this is the 17th annual Congress that they had put on here in Laughlin. It's just amazing. So I want to thank them for that. Regarding the progress of my book, yes, I did tell Bob just 5 minutes ago back behind the curtain that the damn book will be done this year. I'm doing 3 volumes because, frankly, there's just far too much to deal with. Volume 2 will cover from the end of 73 to 1991. It's a really perfect breaking off point, actually. 91 is a perfect year to end it, and it'll be about 500 pages. And yes, I've got about 350 pages done. I'm happy with it. I think we should be done with everything by the end of the year, so I'll keep my fingers crossed. When I originally agreed to do this talk, The Future Held Hostage, it wasn't as a keynote address. It was just as one of the talks here. And when I was asked to do the keynote, I decided to broaden my approach a little bit. So I've got a few other things I want to talk about. We'll be able to get everything in, and I expect to be available for questions after. What I was thinking about, what I'd like to open with is a bit of a reflection on the importance of UFO conferences in general and the specific significance of this conference. I actually first spoke publicly on UFOs here in Laughlin for this Congress in 2001. It was funny because my book was brand new. A couple of people, I guess, knew about me, but not that many. And I got a phone call from Bob Brown, and he introduced himself and said, look, an opening just occurred in our speaker list, and I heard about you. Somebody told me about your work, and I'm interested in having you come by as a speaker at our conference. And I was very flattered, and I said, yeah, sure, when is this? He said, next week. I said, oh, all right, that's good. How long am I supposed to go? He said, 90 minutes. I said, oh. I had no PowerPoint, nothing like that. I cobbled together my thing and came out here. I was scared out of my mind, absolutely terrified. And it turned out great. It was a wonderful, one of the best experiences of my life was that night being here. And the thing about the conference then, as it has remained every time I've come here, is there's a certain quality of the people who come to this conference, even as opposed to any of the others that you go to. But I'll on to that in a moment. I'm interested in explaining why UFO conferences really are so important. And in doing a research for the book that I'm finishing now, some of that research included a discussion in the history of UFO conferences. It turns out that really the conference culture really got started in the early 1970s. Basically by MUFON, Mutual UFO Network. I think they were the leaders in organizing annual symposia. They really weren't this kind of gatherings very much in the 1960s or before, but you start getting them in the 70s. And I think it's fair to say that a kind of UFO research culture really took off in connection, in no small part due to the existence of these conferences, because you'd have speakers really getting together, talking with each other. It's one thing to read somebody's book or to write them letters, but then you meet them in person and ideas are exchanged. And I think you get a certain kind of cross-pollination of ideas and synergy and all of that. So I think that was important. These are some pictures I have here that I've found in various journals of conferences. These are all 1970, 1980 type pictures. I mean, very humble. Just a bunch of guys sitting around in chairs. But that's how it was. They didn't do PowerPoint back then. And I get the idea that a lot of people didn't do visuals either. It was just, and it was old guys. There was Ann Druffel and Linda Howe, and I think that was probably about it. Fortunately, it's a lot better in terms of having a lot of women in the field today. But it was a great development because it allowed researchers to share ideas. It creates community, and that is no small thing, because this topic is not always a pleasant topic. It involves a very wide range of people, but not all of them are on the side of the angels. And so it's important when you're getting hold of an idea that you believe is a true idea, that of extraterrestrial intelligence living here on Earth. That's an important idea, and you're going to have to fight for that idea. And it's a lot easier to fight for that idea if you have a community of like-minded people who support you emotionally and also in any other way, intellectually and so on. And it's not something that should ever be dismissed. It's very important that these conferences exist for the people who attend them and for the speakers and researchers who attend as well. It keeps us going in many, many important ways. The other thing about conferences that occurred to me is how important they are for television. When you think about TV documentaries, how many of them, I can't even imagine, were filmed, at least in part, at some UFO conference. And indeed, my very first time here in '01, I was filmed for a documentary that became a great documentary produced by James Fox, who's here with us this weekend, called Out of the Blue. And I sat down for 3 hours in a hotel room, getting grilled for about a minute and a half. I got my little minute and a half on Out of the Blue. But the thing is that, you know, if you're a producer and you want to make a good documentary, which then gets out into the broader community, which is important, a conference like this is, you know, a very, very important place you want to go. So I think that the conferences have been an important engine for driving forward, you know, the message that, yes, we do want to get across to the rest of the world, which is that this is real. They are here. There's something very, very important going on here, and let's educate the world. So the conferences must continue. This conference in particular, this is a conference that is not like, all right, this ain't MUFON. MUFON conferences, or for example, now Ryan Wood does the crash retrieval conference in Las Vegas. It's also very kind of scientific, you know, hardcore nuts and bolts sort of thing. Over in the DC area, my good friend Stephen Bassett does the X conference. Same kind of thing, very political. No. So now all of the conferences will do your typical like crash retrieval, the cover-up stuff, like I like to do that. UFOs in the media, these are things being covered here in Laughlin this week. Abductions, but then you start getting into, you know, crop circles. Well, MUFON will do a crop circle. It's like the token minority, you know, is like a crop circle presentation. Yes, okay, that's all well and good. Okay, enough of that. Then you start getting into remote viewing. Okay, there goes the neighborhood. Start remote viewing at those places is like just barely acceptable. And then really, now it just all goes to hell. Okay, past lives, right? They won't do this at MUFON. These are, indeed, why not? Well, look, there's a time and a place for everything. MUFON has its purpose, I would argue, but so does the International UFO Congress. These are some of the topics that are being discussed later this week. Past lives, light beings, and tulip people. This was Mike Oren. Mike, I'm not trying to single you out. It's just something I hadn't heard before, so I'll be looking forward to that. Contactee stories, ancient UFOs, ancient astronauts, and so forth. Trance experience. You will be subjected to a trance experience later this week if you so desire. Interdimensionality, channel information, so on. And that's what you know, and there are very conservative researchers in the UFO field who really will look down on this. And I think that's wrong. And the reason I think that's wrong is that it's so easy for people to be complacent and to think that, well, now they've got it all figured out. But you know, in human history, we've never, ever been at a point where we've gotten it all figured out. Never. Go back to ancient Egypt 5,000 years ago. Go to the banks of the Nile and talk to some Egyptian peasant and say, you know, well, how does this world structure? And he'll say, well, I'll give you a good for instance, sir. When the sun goes down, that's the god Ra, and he's going below the disk of the earth, which is like a CD, like a compact disc, right? And below the earth, Ra and Set and some other minor deities are fighting the forces of chaos. And they'd better win, because if they lose, we're all screwed. The universe is over. Fortunately, every night, they seem to emerge victorious, and when the sun comes up, that means that's the signal that they've won. And that is, in fact, the belief system. And so we can look, and actually, it sounds like the 21st century, really. Every time my head hits the pillow, I'm thinking, okay, are we screwed now? Will there be a world in the morning? So maybe they had a point. But what I'm saying, though, is that we can look at these earlier beliefs and think, okay, well, that's very nice and interesting, but that's quite wrong. But then you move ahead 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 years, and you can find equally wrong beliefs. Go back even into our own scientific era, 100 years ago, and you have scientists who'd say, continental drift, impossible. They can't drift. They're too big. 50 years ago, space travel, absurd, ridiculous. But now we have it all figured out, we think, right? So that's silly. And so when we get into topics like this, I think what we are doing is exploring. And that's really the most noble thing that anyone can do, is explore. We're trying to learn more about our world. And every age has had its own very rigid belief structure. I've always felt that rigid belief structure is very intimately related to the power structure. And so by challenging the belief structure, you're challenging the power structure, and I think that's probably good. One of the metaphors, or maybe even cliches these days, that we use to describe our world is that of the Matrix, but I think it's an excellent one. Most of you, I think, are familiar with this movie, and if not, well, it's got some kung fu, and it's got Trinity who wears the black leather, and you can't beat that. But it's a really brilliant metaphor, of course, for our society. And this image here is Morpheus offering the truth to Neo. It's a turning point in the movie, and he says, well, I've got the blue pill. You want to take that, and your reality won't change. You just go home to your apartment and go back to bed, and everything will be just the way it was before. You take the red pill, and I'll take you down the rabbit hole and show you how far it goes, and you can't go back. And of course, he takes the red pill. UFO reality is one example of a matrix that we live in. It's not the only example, but it's a good one. There is a vast, vast abyss lying between actual truth and official truth on the matter of UFOs. And it is such a vast chasm of belief that calling it analogous to the Matrix is dead on accurate, I think. The reality and the official reality are just absolutely different. When we think of how many sightings have occurred in the modern world, it's impossible to calculate. You go back through the years of Project Blue Book in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, they collected about 12,000 sighting reports. Blue Book's job, of course, was to explain away. You get thousands more sightings from private organizations such as NICAP back in those days, APRO, MUFON today. There are, at the National UFO Reporting Center on the web, Peter Davenport publishes just under 4,000 reports a year. He gets 5 times that amount, most of which he doesn't even publish. Davenport, in 15 years of doing this, has collected about 250,000 UFO reports. And that's just him alone. And those are predominantly English-speaking, mostly American, sightings. And that doesn't include like China or Russia or any other place in the world. And on top of that, when you consider that the vast number of UFO witnesses don't report it at all anywhere, 1 in 10 would be a high number, and it's probably more like 1 in 100. I mean, I've spoken to hundreds of people who've said, oh yeah, you're into UFOs. Well, I saw one of those. And they would tell me this amazing story frequently. And it turns out not only would they not have reported it officially, but they often wouldn't even tell their spouse or their closest friends. So, I mean, there's a creepy thing, because the most amazing thing that someone experiences in their life and they tell nobody. We're dealing with this phenomenon in a very atomized way. That's not a good thing. So you have all of this, hundreds of thousands, really millions of sightings, most likely, by the best estimate. And then, of course, you got the Roper polls, which by any estimate, you have 10 to 12% of any given population saying, yes, I saw a UFO. So if you go by that, now we're into millions of people. With all of that, the official word is basically, nothing. Nothing. Now, there's been a little bit of an uptick in media coverage in the last year. The O'Hare sighting, I think, helped to trigger some of that, and Stephenville certainly has upped the ante. And you got Dennis Kucinich, who was outed by his good friend Shirley MacLaine as a UFO witness. That caused him no small amount of grief. Poor Bill Richardson, who got absolutely reamed alive by Chris Matthews on TV. If you saw that, it was actually reprehensible what Matthews did to him, because Richardson believed in UFOs. So, you have this incredible, just astonishing reality that's around us. And the official powers that be do not give this recognition. That is not right. But it's also a signal to us that this is a very important thing. It's the proverbial elephant in the dining room that's, breaking the dishes and eating the peanuts and blocking the TV, but you can't talk about it. So it tells me that there's something important going on here. Now, I don't know why I included this slide, types of evidence. Well, there's lots of types of evidence that the media really tends to, in general, ignore. The kind that I deal with, there's all different ways of getting into this topic. My entry point into this field was through government documents. My professional training is as a historian, and so I'm comfortable with documents, more comfortable with those than other things. And what I thought I would do, and this is very, very quick, I want to do this, I don't want to belabor this. In other presentations, I would give more of a detailed description of these various documents. This is let's call it a top 15 of documentary evidence on UFOs, military documentary evidence. So for instance, for a skeptic, a UFO skeptic may be in this audience for all I know. The Laughlin audiences are different from the others, as I've indicated, but nevertheless, there's probably someone out there, there's probably many people out there who are here for the first time, right? And you're thinking, I met a few already. And I can't assume that you're an expert on this. I can't even assume that you're sympathetic. So what is the argument that guys like me would make to indicate that this is a serious phenomenon? This may be kindergarten class for some of you, but nevertheless, it's always important to remember that there are fundamentals in this field that really we must never forget. And the other thing about this is that if we forget our history in the form of these documents here, then we're forgetting, we're almost dropping our shield in this fight. We need our shield. So these are some documents that are critically important. The 1947 Twining memo, many people know about this. General Nathan Twining ran Air Material Command back then, and in answer to a memo from another general, which had said to him, essentially, do I need to do anything about these flying saucers? Are they ours? Are they real? Twining wrote back a secret memo saying this, as far as the reports we're getting from our military people, yes, the phenomenon is real, not visionary or fictitious. And then he went on to describe them in these reports in great detail, the characteristics of these objects that military personnel were encountering, objects that were in well-kept formations of flight, evasive maneuvers when sighted. The shape was disc-shaped, he said, domed on top, flat on bottom, in 1947. A three-star general saying this to another general. Very interesting indeed. Silent, he said. Again, 1947. Well, that's very interesting indeed. Now, one of the problems that skeptics, these hardcore skeptics, guys like Michael Shermer and so many others who think they know what they're talking about here and actually know nothing, is that they jump 20 steps ahead when they get a report like this, and they say, oh, well, you're telling me that aliens are here. To which I say, well, no, really not yet. okay? What I'm telling you is that this is evidence that there is something very important, unexplained going on in the U.S. military and other militaries as well, but that doesn't have an easy explanation. And that really, in our official version of events, isn't supposed to have happened. That's what I'm saying. So now let's look at the possibilities. But no, the skeptics have this compulsion to trot out this straw man alien argument before they even really look at the complexities of what we're dealing with. And some of these other documents, many of these describe airspace violations that are really astonishing. I mean, causing emergency responses, air bases and naval bases. The CIA memos describing this phenomenon is just utterly baffling and not any kind of known aircraft or natural phenomena, and on and on and on. So these are good. I think one thing I've often told myself I'd like to do is, on my never updated website, is to do a section that does a kind of commentary on these and some other key documents, and I think that I will still do that. Another part of the UFO history, though, that is significant, it's not the only part. There's a lot. This is a very, very deep, multifarious phenomenon, of course. But one thing to keep in mind is that there's been a lot of provocation and confrontation involved in this topic. To wit, there have been attempts that have been going on for 60 years now to shoot these things down. U.S. aircraft have gone down. Other national aircraft have gone down attempting to intercept these objects. It also tells me that it makes it very, very likely that there would have been ample opportunity for crash recoveries of UFOs, and in fact, there's a great deal of witness testimony to that effect. These are, I'm not going to go through these. These are from the mid-1970s, a variety of encounters that we know of involving attempted intercepts of UFOs. This one here, this is a 1980 account from Peru, which is just, it's a drop in the bucket, but it's still astonishing. 2 days in a row, you had Peruvian Air Force chasing after a round UFO. The first time it was seen, it was hovering near Peruvian Air Force airfield. So the commander scrambles an Su-22 aircraft to go get this thing. It's a top-level fighter aircraft. So the amazing thing is that the pilot closes in on this, and he fired at it at close range with absolutely no effect. He made a second pass at the object, at which point it simply outran him. No contest. This happened the next day. The object was seen again. Another Su-22 was scrambled. The pilot did not get an opportunity to fire, but the object just went gone. And we have this in a U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency document. It's very clearly described. It's an amazing thing. So just forget for the moment, that we may be talking about ET or aliens or interdimensional, whatever. Forget that. You know, where are responsible journalists, responsible historians, when they deal with a document like this? They treat it, they don't even treat it as make-believe, they just treat it as if it doesn't exist. This is a problem. The Soviets had their own many encounters, and we know about these encounters, as often happens when a society is on the verge of collapse, as the Soviet Union was in 1989, 1990, leaks started coming out. Like the proverbial deathbed confession, it happens with nations too. It will happen with this nation soon. We're having a very bad time of it, and I absolutely predict that there will be a large number of important leaks coming as a result. It happened in the Soviet Union, though. 1989, 1990, you get a number of high-level military personnel talking about these, the secret history of Soviet UFO encounters. And in our own country here in the 90s, we had many more attempted UFO intercepts. We had the famous Washington, just outside Washington, D.C., 2002 incident in which 2 F-16s were pursuing a blue object that outperformed them in every way, seen by many witnesses, confirmed by the Air Force in an interview with the Washington Post. Now, the Air Force guy said, the only reason the Post covered this, honestly, is that they were scooped by a local radio station, WTOP, which people had called in. They said, "Oh my God, there's these jets chasing this blue object. You should see this." There were about 6 to 8 people who called in. WTOP issued a small news release about this. And there was some very local, limited coverage on the Fox and CNN affiliates, none of which ever made the web on those websites. So as a result, the Washington Post did a medium-length article on this the following day with the typical he said, she said sort of approach. But one thing that came out was that the Air Force spokesman said, yes, they were out there scrambled to intercept something. They had no visual, which is BS because people on the ground saw this thing. You can't tell me the pilots didn't see it. They were tracking it on radar, at one point it blipped off the radar, just disappeared. So we know that much. The Air Force guy said, well, it could have been any number of things. What he didn't say is what things it could have been. I'd like to know. What blue object, this is after 9/11 too, is streaking across the skies, coming down at an 80-degree angle, stopping, waiting for the jets to turn around and get it, and then zipping off. What does that? Any number of objects, sure. And then we have, I mean, how stupid is this? But you know, these Air Force guys, what can they actually say? Like in Stephenville, this is just a month ago. You get an object described by 50 people as a flying Walmart. That's what one guy said. Okay? So it's low, faster than the F-16s that were chasing it, they said. Yes, more F-16s. This thing's low over the ground, silent, huge, like a battleship in the sky. And so now the media they get 50 witnesses, okay? It's just a month ago. So this poor Air Force major, I feel for this guy, I really do. He's got the media right in his grill, and they're saying, okay, sir, what do you think about this? And so what is he going to say? Yeah, well, actually, there appears to be a very humongous object that is twice the speed of our F-16s. Hopefully they won't eat us. Really, there's nothing he can say. And he's a major, right? So he's not going to be authorized. So he does the standard thing, which he's trained to do, which is to say, well, they were apparently viewing reflections of landing commercial aircraft. Of course it's stupid. But he had no choice. What's interesting about the Stephenville case, by the way, is that I had water here, didn't I? Water. No? Okay, never mind. Who needs water? Not me. I had wine. I'm fortified. What was interesting is that for quite some time, the Air Force denied that there were any F-16s in the area. Looked like that was going to be discovered. And so the Air Force, I think, very intelligently said, oh yes, in fact, we did have some F-16s doing training in the area. So in other words, the witness accounts have now been corroborated at least to that degree. Very significant. So what we know then, this is an initial summary. I have a long way to go. Don't leave. The summary is that we have more than sufficient documentation to establish that there is military interest in, thank you, Melanie, interest in this topic, in UFOs, and that they're trying to chase these things down. And furthermore, I didn't really get into this thus far, and although Don Schmidt spoke very eloquently about this morning, the likelihood of crash retrievals, definite, near certainty, let us say, of crash retrievals. Many times, Roswell being the granddaddy, but there have been others. In effect, a silent Cold War that has been taking place. Now, I think that this is not the full story, but it's part of the story. It's important. So now let me shift gears a little bit and talk a little bit about the structure of our secrecy. This is something that I've personally been trying to figure out for the last couple of years. In other words, we all kind of get the idea that maybe the president doesn't know everything there is to know about this. God, please let that be the case. So All right, but if he's not in charge, then the obvious question would be, well, who would be? And that's a valid question to ask. Like in the movie Independence Day, right? In the one scene where the president finally learns that, oh my God, this UFO stuff is real. And he said, well, why was I not informed? And he learns that, well, sir, you didn't have a need to know. Now, whether, it's an open question as to how much presidents know and don't know. Grant Cameron will be here later this week, and he is, of all people, I think, really, of all public researchers who don't have high-level classified clearances, maybe the best to talk about that. I'm going to give my own 2 cents on this to some extent and try to deal with this topic, dealing with the public versus private aspects of this. And in effect, I think that there's reason to think that they kind of mesh together. One of my personal heroes, I guess in, intellectual life, whatever, is this guy here, C. Wright Mills. I'm sure some of you know who he was. C. Wright Mills was a very, very great American sociologist back in the 1950s, kind of a maverick. Back in an era when typical American political theory, political science was at the height of its self-congratulatory, yay, yay, America system is the best, Mills had a much colder eye. And he studied what he called the power elite of the American society and concluded on a sociological level that, in fact, there's a very small clique group of individuals in certain social classes who really run the show. And he broke them down into 3 roughly equal kinds of groups: military, corporate, and government, and essentially argue that they very much are kind of intertwined. Their children marry each other, and they go to the same clubs, and so on and so on. And this was Mills's vision of how America was being run. I think that's certainly an important point. If I were to look at that power elite today, and maybe even in the 1950s, but certainly I think today, I think it's possible to suggest that the triangle might not be an equilateral triangle, but maybe an isosceles triangle, at the top of which you might find private corporate power, wealth, as the first among equals, dominant over military and government. And in fact, maybe that's wrong. Instead of calling them the corporate power or transnational corporation, maybe we might just say the people who own those corporations, I think is probably more accurate. But the point is that it's fair to consider that governments per se may not really be the dominant power brokers in our world. They're important, they're powerful tools, but is there a power behind them? Well, I think that we all lived through a revolution and often didn't even realize we were living through it. This wasn't like the Russian Revolution or Hitler's seizure of power, which was like in your face. This is something that was a little less overt. And it took a couple of years. The transnational revolution. My own placement of this revolution takes it from 1984 to 1994. In other words, if you took the world in 1984, and then you take the world as it looked like in 1994, I think that you would find a vastly different world. You have a world in which, there's a Soviet Union to one there isn't. You have a world in which there is no internet to a world in which there's a World Wide Web that's now functioning. A world in which there are not, and then many, transnational, international structures in place to create a new global order. What we had, in a sense, is the death, or at least the mortal wounding of the nation state in that period of time. So much so that by the year 2000, in a survey done, or an analysis done of the 100 largest economies in the world, 51 of those were corporate economies, 49 were national economies. So a huge transformation, I think, has been taking place. You might call it a hostile takeover of the world. Sometimes I do. I think it's accurate to say that the large corporate interests do determine who governs in most countries, who serves on the courts, what laws are enacted, whether and against whom what wars are being fought. They have many and significant levers of power, including the World Bank, the IMF, NAFTA, the WTO, Most national governments, I think, are very much beholden to them. And then you have the standard conspiracy groups, which are real. They exist. The Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, the Bilderbergers, these all are significant. They have powerful people involved in them. And I am not saying that every person involved in these groups is evil. There are good and evil people everywhere you go. But what I'm saying is that these structures have transformed our world, and we need to be aware of this, for better or for worse. These organizations are the mechanisms by which the control of the world is assured for these groups. And I think the main goal that they have, in my estimation, is the privatization of global resources, that is, ownership of them. Now, there's very little discussion of this in media, and I think it's not hard to see why, because media is part of the problem. More than half of everything that you are liable to encounter in terms of what you read, see, or hear in the course of your day is going to be owned by one of 5 corporations in the world. That's a fact. And then the next 5 after them, the top 10 give you a total stranglehold. Now, there are there's still bastions of freedom, as I like to think of them, but you've got to look for them. You have to be active. You can't get them by just turning on your television. That won't work. So that's a bit of a structure of the world, my kind of anti-establishment, rabble-rousing portion of this talk. I want to shift gears yet again, and now, with that in mind, let's deal with the presence of non-humans in this big picture. The elite deals with ET. So that sounds like it could be a limerick. I have to think about that. Okay, so let's go back to the 1940s, and we'll have a little thought experiment. Pretend that you are Harry Truman. Really, and that you are presented with some very heavy information. Your top general, your top science advisor, perhaps Vannevar Bush, comes up to you and says, sir, we have recovered technology that does not appear to have originated from this civilization, not made by human hands. Okay, that's big news. So now the question is, what do you do with this information? It's not an easy decision to make. Do you tell the world? Well, I think it's very probable that you wouldn't want to tell the world, certainly at least not right away. You need time to absorb this. You have to figure things out. You need to know, who are these other people? Do we have to worry about them? And then if you tell the world that you've got this material, well, it's going to be very, very hard not to share it. And I mean, at that very time, the United States had a monopoly of atomic bombs, and it was very well understood that the Soviets had moles and spies throughout the U.S. establishment then. They were trying to figure the secret out. The U.S. did not want to share that. So can we really expect that Harry Truman would want to share something as exotic as alien technology? I should think not. And so it's not hard, it's very understandable to see why secrecy would begin on this. I think what he might want to do is a very logical thing, which is to gather together a very elite group of people and say, figure this out. What do we need to do here? Let's come with our contingency plans, figure out this technology, can we do anything with it, and so on and so on. I think all of the logical questions that you would probably think of is probably what they thought of. Would you create an MJ-12 kind of organization? Yes, of course you would. Now, with bodies that might have been recovered, with technology that might have been recovered, well, that's important, and that's a big claim that I'm laying before you. Again, for many of you, I think that's probably not such a big deal. Some of you, though, you might be thinking, hey, wait a minute, where do you get off with this claim? It's one thing to talk about UFOs out there, but bodies, technology, come on. Well, in fact, I think there's very good evidence to support that claim. Some very, very well plugged in, well-known individuals have spoken at length about this. The UFO researcher, Leonard Stringfield, I think I would say is probably the most important of these people, in the sense that Stringfield in the 1970s and 80s was the recipient of, well, just in a large number, scores of accounts, firsthand accounts, of individuals who would say something like, I worked at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and I saw these alien bodies one day in cold storage, and so on. Stories like this. Stringfield started to collect them. Or stories about crash retrievals from an extremely wide array of sources. These other names on the list are other individuals that are significant in the story. They are all in my next book, which will be out before this year is out, so you can read it then. Or you probably know their stories anyway. So let's move on, because I don't want to belabor that point. What happens with the secrecy? I want to go back to the structure of the secrecy. What I think happens is that it goes private. We talk about the government cover-up, but you see, it occurred to me one day that that really isn't the most accurate way necessarily to think about this. Because if I was the Army or the Air Force and I had this piece of alien technology, well, now what do I do with it? Well, if I'm going to study it, if I want to try to build something from it, I'm going to go to the guys that build things that I use, like my contractors, defense contractors, private corporations, who have the R&D in place. They've got the engineering, they've got the manufacturing facilities, the know-how to build something like that. So I'm going to have to go to them at some point, which means that there's got to be some level of giving up ownership of this technology, of these acquired artifacts. So if I go to General Electric or Lockheed or whomever and say, okay, here's this piece, I want your scientists to study it, they'll say, well, great. So of course, any patents we get are ours, and I'd say, sure, fine. But the piece itself, well, that might, maybe the lawyers covertly hammer out an agreement where there might be joint ownership of this. I don't know. But I can see a lot of this going private. And it's a particularly attractive option for a lot of other reasons anyway. When your own government is dominated by leaders of industry and finance, I mean, this is their natural milieu, is to send a piece to the private sector. When your own advisors, for example, are dominated by the Council on Foreign Relations, which draws its leadership from industry and finance anyway. And this type of strategy helps with secrecy, it seems to me. Because now the project isn't simply classified, but it becomes proprietary, which is really better from the standpoint of security in many ways. This has been the claim, indeed, of astronaut Edgar Mitchell as far back as 1997. Edgar Mitchell was Apollo 14. For him to say something like this is no small matter. He says, we are looking at likely reverse engineered technology in the hands of humans that are not under government control or any type of high-level control. Wow, where's NBC for that statement? Edgar Mitchell said that in 97. He said it periodically in subsequent years. Now, why would he say that? Well, let me continue, because he said a few other things at that time, talking about back-engineered technology in the hands of a select group of people, formerly government, he argued, formerly intelligence, but now under private sector control. Maybe they originally had government oversight, but no longer. This technology, he suggested, did not appear to be in our military arsenals, but rather in the hands of a clandestine group. Well, that's a major thing to say, but keep in mind that Edgar Mitchell has said that he got a lot of his information from several elite sources. He's never given these people up. Of course he wouldn't. But when you are as prestigious an individual as he is, clearly he's able to talk with just about anybody he wants to. And I am inclined to trust his judgment and his sources. I myself have spoken to a few people. I don't have a large array of deep-throat sources, but every now and then I get to talk to people who are in a position to know certain things, and they have totally corroborated this. A scientist who said to me, point blank, that, confirmed the program, highly classified program, to study alien technology and bodies. Another individual who had very excellent connections during the 1990s with high-level individuals, including one 4-star former member of the Joint Chiefs, who told him, yes, there's an MJ-12 type of group, and who said furthermore that there's actually a conflict among that leadership broken down by generations, so that the older individuals were more in favor of letting the secret out because they'd already made all their money. The younger people were the hardliners who hadn't made all their money. Now, that was as of the late 1990s. So again, these are reasons to believe that the secret has gone private. Now, just because an organization is private doesn't mean they don't get your tax dollars. We know this. If you're undertaking a secret program to study alien technology and bodies, okay, well, I assume it's got to cost a lot of money. I mean, this stuff ain't cheap. We're talking about very advanced technology. Very, very, very advanced. So it's like a secret Manhattan Project. Someone's got to pay for this. Well, the answer is that you are paying for it, and I am paying for it. I think at least in part. There are special access programs, of course, deeply classified. They have limited to no oversight. And other programs that are not special access programs that go under different names but are even more secret, frankly. So there's no end to the secrecy within the Byzantine, labyrinthian structure of the U.S. national security establishment. All right? The money's got to remain hidden. You can't just requisition this through congressional appropriations, obviously. So what it means, I mean, by its very nature, I would argue, is a subversion of our formal political process. I mean, look, if you believe in this thing called representative government, then you are supposed to know what you're paying for. Now, there's classified programs. We all realize that there are legitimate classified secrets. Okay, fine. But this is 60 years now. And it's the most important thing in our world. And it probably involves a lot of money. And, do we believe or not believe in government of the people, by the people, for the people? Well, I think we should continue to believe in that. We have, since 1994, the knowledge that there have been trillions of dollars missing from federal accounting in the federal government. There was a law that was passed that year requiring the federal government to account for its transactions in a business-like way. Since that time, there have been periodic news reports discussing the loss of not billions, but trillions of dollars. Trillions of dollars. Just let that sink in. 1998, an article in the Washington Times talking about $3.4 trillion. Next year, congressional hearings discussed the loss of $2.3 trillion. In 2000, $1.1 trillion. 2.6 in 01. That's Donald Rumsfeld, by the way, and that was his statement in 2001. Within certain circles, a rather famous statement that he made in the House Appropriations Committee in July of 01, just a month and a half before 9/11. Rumsfeld, now this is when the Bush team was brand new, of course. And he's talking about the the next year's defense budget for the Pentagon. And he says, look, the accounting system that I've inherited is completely snarled up. He said, our accountants are telling us that we cannot account for $2.6 million in transactions, if that's believable, he says. Now, he's not talking about the federal government, he was talking about the Pentagon. And the Pentagon's fiscal year budget for 01 just happened to be $310 billion, about 1/8 the amount he had just mentioned. Now, I don't understand this. I really don't, and I'm not trying to be facetious here. If somebody can explain this to me, I would be grateful. Come to my table. I'll be here until Wednesday. How is it possible to lose track of 8 times your annual budget? I mean, if you make $50,000 and the IRS says, there appear to be $400,000 in transactions that are not accounted for, is that not a problem? So anyway, the point is that there's a lot of money that's gone missing. In 02, another trillion was discussed in the San Francisco Chronicle. Now, very probably, I assume, there's a lot of overlap among these. It's hopefully, let's hope that it's not 3.4 plus 2.3 plus 1.1. So maybe there's some overlap in here, but the point is that there's a lot of money that seems to have just disappeared. And I believe it's at least reasonable that some of this money could have gone into the infrastructure that I've been hinting at, a kind of UFO infrastructure designed to study and replicate that technology. I think it's entirely possible. I can't say that I know this, but I think it's reasonable. What would this program be about, this secret program? Well, as I've been sort of talking about. I think it's about studying alien technology, but presumably it's about trying to make UFOs of our own. And let me get into that a little bit. Back in the 1980s, one source of this information was a journalist named James Goodall, who wrote for a number of aerospace journals, a very mainstream kind of guy, with an interest in Area 51, an interest in Groom Lake activities, and cultivated a number of people who worked out of there during that time period in the mid-'80s. Goodall concluded back then that there were at least 8 deeply black programs flying out of Groom Lake, including a silent triangle. That was his conclusion. One of his sources, he asked this man who'd worked at Groom Lake for close to a decade. He said, "Do you believe in UFOs?" The guy said, "Absolutely, positively, they exist." Another source, circa 1985, said to Goodall, "We have things out there that are literally out of this world, better than Star Trek, better than anything you can see in the movies." Wow, 1985. Now, maybe this guy's just blowing smoke, but maybe not. Goodall believed him. There are other journalists who have come to similar conclusions, among them George Knapp. George Knapp didn't just interview Bob Lazar, he interviewed about a dozen other Area 51 insiders, as he called them, who corroborated, by and large, many of the things that Bob Lazar claimed. That is, the existence of flying saucers inside Groom Lake testing facility. None of these people were willing to talk publicly. No surprise there when you're dealing with highly classified issues where you can get into a lot of trouble, presumably. I think that this incident is one of several of the 1980s and 90s that point also to a connection here. This is the Nellis UFO of 1994. This, you can Google this. The video is easily available. It's 2-3 minutes long. Quite interesting. This was leaked to the TV show Hard Copy in early 1995, and there's been several analyses done of it. It's possible to do an analysis of it because there are readings rather that indicate the altitude and the position of this object. So it's possible to calculate its speed and motion. Within a 2-minute span of time, its speed ranged from as low as 15 miles per hour to about 500 miles per hour, which is pretty impressive. Made a right-angle turn, apparently, at 140 miles per hour. So, and there's audio along with this, and you can hear the people who are obviously working at the facility getting this on camera saying, "What is this? I've never seen anything like this," and so on. So they were mystified by it. I think that I might assume it's something that we made since it's at our testing facility, but you can never be sure, I guess. But I think it's reasonable to think it could be something that we've made. Well, what else might this program be about? One I think, is biotech, studying alien bodies. I'm going to pass that by for today. Maybe I'll deal with that another day. But I do think it's about developing a secret space program, and that I want to focus on a little bit right now. Why would we have a secret space program? That's a question. Why would such a thing be needed? Well, presumably you would use it to go places secretly, I would think. Moon, anyone? Mars? Is it possible? Sounds crazy. Why would we do that? Well, I can think of one reason why we would want to go to Mars secretly. I'm not saying that we have, but at least we might be interested in that if those anomalies are real. When I started researching this topic a number of years ago, I was so conservative. I just wanted to provide a very conservative, clear argument that the topic was legitimate. I was afraid, really, to get into things like abductions or crop circles or the Mars anomalies. And it's not that I didn't think that they could be true or legitimate. I guess I just didn't feel at the time that I could write about them in a way that would be defensible and, solid, right? But you stay in it long enough in this field, and at a certain point you have to confront these things, right? I remember at one point dealing with the Mars anomalies, I I wrote to one individual who was a very intelligent, well-established person who knew a lot of people. And I decided to kind of feel him out on his attitude on Mars, and I wrote an email, not really belittling the Mars phenomenon, but that seemed a little flippant, let's say, a little flip. And he wrote back, he said, "You shouldn't make fun of that. There are many of us who take that very seriously and are truly perplexed by what is going on up there." And considering that this is a person who I always have felt plays his cards rather close to his chest, I thought, okay, well, I'm going to listen. And ever since that, I've looked with a lot of interest at the moon and Mars and what's going on there. And I do believe that there's something going on there. I definitely believe that. I don't say that I know it, but I believe it. And so if there are odd things up there, so let's say that you're in the Secrecy group and now you've discovered that there are anomalies on the moon or Mars, and you know that these are the product of another civilization. So now what do? Well, you're going to want to check them out for sure, but you need to do it so that no one else knows. Hence the necessity of the secret space program. And this also applies if there are anomalies in low Earth orbit, in space, and there are many such anomalies. And so it would seem to require a secret space program. And I think that this man stumbled upon such a thing, Gary McKinnon. Gary McKinnon, from the alleged supposed safety of his home in the UK, was trying to hack into U.S. defense sites looking for proof of a UFO cover-up when he wasn't smoking weed, or at the same time that he was smoking weed. And, well, okay, so in 2000 he gets something at the U.S. Space Command site. He found a list of officers' names under the heading non-terrestrial officers, he says. That's pretty interesting. Found a list of what were called fleet-to-fleet transfers that had names of ships that were not U.S. Navy. He can't remember the names of those ships. He gets arrested in 2002, and, well, his story is not over. Gary McKinnon faces a possibility of going to Guantanamo. So the point is this. There are skeptics who said, well, it is impossible for him to have hacked into anything significant. There is no way, they say, they could have done it. But yet the U.S. military wants to put him away. So he got into something, and he says he got into an ET-related program. And that's where we're at. Okay? Now you have also, I think, the work of this gentleman. Very important work. And unfortunately, Jeff Challenger is no longer with us in the land of the living. I never got to know Jeff very well. I met him on a few occasions and always admired him. Jeff was honored here at this conference not long ago for the outstanding work that he has done. What Jeff did was, Jeff was disabled and was not able to get out. And his great love was, as a child, was NASA and the space program, and spent his adult years collecting video footage of NASA and European space missions and Russian missions and so on, and China missions at the end there, and putting up on his website evidence of anomalies. And some of these anomalies are really interesting. To Jeff's credit, he was never one of these kinds of people who just swallowed anything that came his way. He was very critically minded. And in fact, on his website, offers very cogent, rational, prosaic explanations for a lot of the things that are on his site. But he was nothing if not intellectually honest, and there are a number of what appear to be truly anomalous events that he captured on his site. I'm going to show you one. This is from the STS-114 mission from 2005, not that long ago. And what it shows is an object that appears to be doing a U-turn in space. And you don't need me or anybody to tell you that that's not supposed to happen. So this clip is going to cycle through, so you'll get to see it a few times. So if you miss it the first time, don't worry, but you're not going to miss it the first time. It's really quite obvious. The other thing I should point out is that This is a very sped up clip. So the reality is that this took several minutes to do the U-turn. In fact, you're going to see it in a very, very fast version. And then the other last thing I'll say is that Jeff had the problem that a lot of people would steal his work and claim it as their own. There are UFO researchers who would be interested in the space anomalies and parade his hard work in coming up with this as their own. And so what he did is he ended up putting a lot of short clips up there with his logo, Project Prove, on there, so you'll see that. But nevertheless, you're going to be able to see this very easily. So let me go to the clip, and okay, there it is. So it's turning around. You can see it, I assume. You're going to see it again. It's really not difficult. I hope you can see it. It's basically turning around. So the next one I'm going to show you is a stabilization enhancement of this same thing. And you're actually going to see it maneuvering as it turns. So let me do one more of this. Quite interesting. And it seems to be a little, the computer here is running a little slow. And the video is not quite as smooth as it is. If you go to his website, it's a much smoother looking motion. So, but I think you get the idea. Okay, so enough of that. So that's at least the beginnings of some evidence that there's some strange things going on in this world, in outer space. Beginnings of getting a sense of what is exactly maybe how the secrecy is functioning. It's not all the answers. And now let's just keep going. Because humans are not the only part of this equation. Now, for many years, when I would talk publicly about this topic, I don't know, I kind of avoided really getting into detailed discussions of what I thought these others are. I don't often like using the word alien. I use it out of, I guess, habit, because everyone else does, but whatever they are, beings, extraterrestrials, other entities, what are they? Who are they? What are they doing? Do we have to worry about them? Are they nice? Are they not nice? And within the UFO research field, of course, just as though in national politics, the attitudes break down on the left and right on an array of issues, so too, clearly, in the UFO field. Those of us who follow this, there's a left and right wing here as well, and we all know this. So there are those who focus on ethical, upper dimensional entities and angelic types of beings that are here to guide us and to help us. So let's call that the liberal end of the spectrum, right? And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have people who focus on the kind of nasty things that these other beings are doing. Abductions, and mutilations have been attributed to them, and a number of other rather unseemly things. The creation of a hybrid species. The fact that they travel by stealth, that they are, not open about what they do, is sometimes seen as a bad thing, right? So you have this spectrum of attitude. And this conference, I think, really displays that spectrum to its fullest, in fact. So, who are they? What are they up to? Can we really know? Can we have knowledge of this? Well, there's a few things about them that I find interesting and intriguing. That abductees or experiencers report communications with these that are often telepathic in nature, including things like virtual reality dreams. So in other words, these beings have the ability to get inside our heads and to communicate in that way. There's a lot of messages that have come to us over the years. They don't all coincide with each other. There's reason to speculate that we're dealing with more than one intelligence behind it, maybe with more than one agenda. And incidentally, before all of these get covered up by verbiage, this image is a 1982 drawing by a lady named Gail McBride for MUFON. It's an excellent sketch of a prototypical gray alien. This is a black and white painting. It's actually color, but this is a black and white representation of the alien that was said to be present at the Betty and Barney Hill abduction case, that right there. The center being this female with the long hair was featured in a book by Bill Chalker, Australian researcher, who wrote a book called Hair of the Alien. This is an entity that appeared before an Australian man. He described his encounter in great length. It's a fascinating case. And then these drawings on the end, these are many thousands of years old. They're from Australia. They are described by the Aboriginal population as Wajina, which means sky beings. And just to look at them, I think, is suggestive enough. If these are ET, then they have been here a very, very, very long time. And that's significant, of course. I think it's fair to conclude that hybridization is part of the picture of what is going on here. They appear to be very strongly to be abducting some people. Some of them are abducting people and conducting genetic experiments or acting on us in a way to create a hybrid species. Whether intentionally or not, it is a fact that many humans, when encountering UFOs or alien beings, have an intense fear that is created. I have spoken to a number of people, and I've read many, many more accounts of people who actually just go insane with fear when they encounter some of these UFOs. This may be a normal human reaction to something as extraordinary as that. But it's important to keep in mind that that's part of it. We are afraid of them. Many of us are afraid of them. The fact that they can telepathically communicate with us, the fact that we can have this intense fear, or at other times have these very odd, unusual feelings of calm. That's the other thing. There are many times you hear accounts of individuals who say, I don't know why, under the circumstances, but I felt incredibly peaceful and calm. Well, do they have the ability to trigger our emotions? I think they do. And do they therefore have the ability to manipulate us in various ways? I think the answer is yes. Of course they would. One abductee who was interviewed by the late Carla Turner back in the 1990s described them, I think, in a way that a lot of people would describe them, which is to say that there are perfectly real aliens exist out there, and it seems that one kind wants to help us, and another kind wants to deceive us. Do these aliens, do these ETs have long-range plans? I should think they would. After all, they've expended what appears to be a great amount of energy in being here. I mean, they're here in large numbers, I think. They have technology that is incredible, that on an economic basis for them, I suspect is a significant outlay. And so that this is important to them. And if it's important to them, I should think they may have long-range plans. Two things that I can say I'm confident in saying is that they operate by stealth and that our militaries are chasing them. Now, that doesn't mean that they're the bad guys. Maybe we're the bad guys. Maybe we're not the bad guys. But there's confrontation there. And it's going to have to be part of the picture if and when, especially when this comes out in the open. And the day is going to arrive as I'm going to argue in a few minutes, that will be inevitable. And so when it comes out, we're going to have to deal with the fact that they've been abducting us. We're going to have to deal with the fact that we've been trying to shoot them down. We're going to have to find out why all of these things have been happening. There's a lot of explaining that's going to have to be coming. I think that we are intensely interesting right now to any extraterrestrial, non-terrestrial species that would be here. And the reason is, this is a drawing by Vincent van Gogh from the 1880s. It shows a French peasant cutting down wheat. He's got tools that actually are almost identical to tools that were in use in the ancient Near East about 10,000 years ago. His clothing's a little bit more advanced. He's a lot more comfortable. He's got nice shoes and a hat and so on. But the technology is not really very different than what had been going on in use for thousands and thousands of years. That was only about a century ago. And we went from that to this. Computer integrated circuits in about 100 years. It's an astonishing transformation. I mean, we went from that to the electric light bulb, to radio, to television, to the atomic bomb, to computers, and now to artificial intelligence, and to space travel. Good grief, 100 years. I mean, we forget this because we lived through it. And when we wake up today, well, today's a lot like yesterday, and yesterday's a lot like the day before, and we really do. We don't appreciate the dramatic nature of change when you look at it over a decade or 2 or 3 decades or a century. It's astonishing. Well, I can assure you that non-terrestrial entities that are here are very aware, and they are also very likely looking at our future. Dolores Cannon earlier today suggested that they are afraid of us, and I would support that. I think that they are, because we're not just violent, but we're really going to be quite formidable. I mean, yes, I realize that they're probably advanced too, but progress doesn't, I don't think, go at a linear way. I think it goes exponentially. And we are on a very steep exponential chart right now. We're moving into a near future, and by that I mean 10 to 15, 20 years from now, in which computers will be widely considered to have exceeded human intelligence. So that, in other words, you'll wake up and you'll talk to your computer, and your computer will talk back to you. And your computer will sound like a person, except that your computer will be able to do a quadrillion calculations per second and pull information off the internet instantly. So it'll be like you on a very good day with some good coffee and maybe a little better, okay, to be fair. So they'll be smarter than us in certain important ways. And then, of course, you have AI experts who disagree on what the outcome of that will be. Some will have argued that that'll be great because they'll help us out. Others are going to say, oh, yeah, humans, there we go. Will they do a Terminator scenario on us, or a Matrix, or iRobot, or something nice like that? We don't know. But this is the near-term future, in the opinion of people who get paid a lot of money to study those things. The human genome will be nailed. Nanotechnology will be practical. Nanofactories will, think Replicator on Star Trek, those will be, many people believe, will be available. The human brain will be decoded and uploaded, so you could copy and paste your brain to a computer. If I do that in 15 years, my computer will be arguing with me. I'm Rich Dolan. No, I'm Rich Dolan. I don't know. And then, yeah, you could just do a whole bunch. Most of us maybe shouldn't do that. Computers will claim to be conscious, and most of us, it has been argued, will accept those claims. And whether they will be conscious the way we are is maybe not really the point, but they may seem like they're conscious, okay? So this is our near future. It's pretty amazing. I'm pretty confident in thinking that ETs that are here are aware of this. And then we move to things like quantum computing, which I don't even pretend to understand how that actually works. All I can read are what the experts say, and they say that quantum computing will be to contemporary computing what computing today is to a pen, a quill, and paper. Okay, so it will be a radical jump again in the capabilities of what, and these are in the coming decades. So we are reinventing what we are, all of which means that we're on a kind of high tightrope. All right, I didn't really get into why our civilization is precarious, but I think we all get it. What will it be? Will it be petroleum? Will it be water? Will it be ecosystem cascading failure? What will it be? I don't know, but something can cause a possible meltdown of an infrastructure on which 6.5 billion people depend. And if one of those things fails, we're going to be in deep trouble. We're going to fall, and we're not going to fall to the level of the Van Gogh peasant. We could fall much farther. Because, frankly, most of us don't know how to farm. Most of us don't know how to milk a cow. And even if we did, the global environment is so badly emasculated that it wouldn't be able to support us anyway. So we've got a problem here, which also, digressing a little bit, but means that the urgency of coming out with this information is much greater than it ever was before. Back in 1960, if you had this secret, you could tell yourself, well, there's really no rush. We have all the petroleum we need, water's fine, all the stuff is great. We need to have time to figure all this out, and meanwhile, we'll just keep going. Well, okay, that's cool, but this is not 1960. You have a doubling of petroleum demand every 15 to 20 years globally. So it's like that old Chinese parable of the peasant who does a favor for the emperor. The emperor says, thank you, I'll give you anything you want. The peasant says, okay, great. He takes out a chessboard and puts a grain of rice on one square, 2 on the next, 4 on the next, 8 on the next, and he keeps doubling. He says, I don't really want much. I just want all these squares filled with a doubling of rice each square. The emperor thinks, dumb peasant, I'd have given you something nice. Okay, fine, no problem. And as you can imagine, by the time you get toward the end of that chessboard, that's more rice than has ever been grown in the history of human civilization. And that's the power of doubling. Global demand for petroleum has been doubling pretty regularly since it was first found in Titusville, Pennsylvania in 1859. And I don't care how much is in the ground. I don't care if the earth is regenerating it. If you keep doubling your demand, at some point you're not going to have enough to meet that demand. And it is possible that we're hitting that now. It's possible. And if it's not petroleum, we have a water crisis, people. China is sinking because they're sucking their country dry. Same as India, same as many parts of Africa, and same as many parts of this country. How long are we going to do this? And we're going to grow our fuel. We're going to grow corn as fuel. You'll turn the earth into a desert before you get enough fuel, enough BTUs to replace that, what we need. It's not possible. So we have infrastructure problems. So that's the bad part of the tightrope. The good part, I guess, is that we have a chance of getting to the other side. If we get to the other side of this tightrope, that is, if we are able to have major technological breakthroughs before we crash, well, then things can be, less catastrophic, and they can be maybe nice and interesting. Certainly a wild ride, but I'll take a wild ride as opposed to, dying of starvation and watching my children die. I don't want that. So this is why also that we're of intense interest to them. I often think that we must be the greatest show in the quadrant right now because, we're this brilliant little species. We really are brilliant when we're not stupid, but we could be really smart. And we're in the process of this leap right now. And we have to assume that they are very aware of this, so they're watching us, probably, Very, very interested. I have to think that some of these attempts at taking human DNA by them is maybe part of their fear that we're just going to go the way of the dodo bird. And maybe they're preserving our DNA, maybe. Or maybe they just want to replace us with a hybrid race of their own. But I think that we're amazingly, intensely interesting right now, as opposed to any other time of our history. But so let's say we get over that tightrope, we get to the other side, and we've created this super intelligent machine species that now is working with us as part of our new civilization. If that's so, I think we could assume that we'll have a fundamentally different society, and one that includes a basic knowledge of the ET reality. I think that's probably fair. Now, that would bring in a variety of fun problems of the exopolitical variety. Exopolitics is one of these words that has entered the research lexicon. I was unsure about this word for a long time. I was a bit standoffish, I admit. I have friends here who are very involved in exopolitics. I have often myself been associated with exopolitics, despite the fact that I've really never written about it and I don't belong to any exopolitical group, but I guess because of some of the work I do, I'm often included as someone who's kind of in there, in the mix. But for a long time, I just felt that the whole concept of exopolitics was a bit premature. I mean, how do you talk about a political structure with ET when you don't even have a recognition that ET is here? You know, can't we do one thing first, that is get disclosure of their reality and then move on? But no, I don't feel that that's necessary any longer. I think my feeling is that it's reasonable to discuss the politics of dealing with the extraterrestrial reality, and I guess we can call it exopolitics. There have been arguments against some of the exopolitical assumptions that seem to be dominant these days, i.e. that the aliens are good. There are many people who don't agree with that. That's a fair criticism, but that's not a dismissal of exopolitics per se. That's a criticism of the particular interpretation, you know. There's lots of ways you can conceive of this. Anyway, let's go on to some practical problems. There's a huge array of problems that can come up. Like if we learn that aliens some of them look just like us, and they are living with us. And hey, if they look like us and live with us, maybe some of them aren't just sweeping the floors, but maybe some of them are holding positions of influence and power. What if we learn that? What if people like David Icke actually turned out to be correct about some of the things that he said, i.e. that they can change their shape, that they are trying to manipulate us, or that they are psychic vampires on us? What if that's true? Well, we'll have to deal with it, but it's a possibility. Okay, someone said, no, it's not. Well, good, I hope it's not. One thing that I will say, all right, you know what I'm not? I'm not a fanatic. And I'm not someone who ever believes that I should say that I know when I really know that I don't know, okay? And in this field, as anywhere you go, you have all different kinds of people. You have very conservative Christian fundamentalists. Yes, they're in here too. Bible-toting, Jesus-loving people who say the Lord is the way, okay? The ETs are demonic entities. They know the answers. You have other people who know with equal force that, no, they're wonderful, angelic beings. They know this. Well, I don't know either of those things. I'm sorry, but I just don't know. They're all on the table. And when we say we know something, it's one thing to say it to ourselves in this kind of environment. But when we go out into the world and if we think it's important to educate other people, we have to be careful. with what we say we know. We have to distinguish. Thank you. Go ahead, clap on that. Even if you're right, I don't think it's going to help us to look like idiots when we talk to a media that already thinks we're idiots. What if we learn that there's many factions of ETs out there and that they don't all get along? All right? I think that's a real possibility. What if we learn, as I think is the case, that our militaries have at least been engaged in some kind of hostility with some of them? What if we learn that they've been abducting us and creating a hybrid race against, the will of those people who've been abducted? No one volunteers for that kind of work. What if we learn that they created us, as Charles Fort once suggested, if we are property? Well, I don't have answers to these questions, but these are legitimate questions, and they just show some of the real complexities of this mind-bending topic, one which I so innocently dipped my toes into about 15 years ago, thinking, all I want to know is, was this a topic of historical interest to our national security people? Good God, such innocent days. Then you have just not exopolitical problems, but good old-fashioned political problems with the disclosure of this reality. How do you undo a lie like this? Stephen Bassett, a man that I love as a brother, I've disagreed with him consistently over many of these questions. Stephen believes that the government, when it discloses, will be able to convince people that its 60 years of deception were for the best, and people will accept it. Well, I'm not really of that opinion. I think people are going to be pissed. And when they find out the real structure of the secrecy, I think they're going to be very angry. And they have a right to be. Undoing a lie that big is not an easy thing. You look at the example of the Soviet Union. It's not an exact example, but it's close. For all those years, the Soviet Union just went along with falsifying its history and setting up gulags and doing all kinds of nasty things. Then comes Gorbachev in 1985, and out of nowhere, he starts talking about glasnost and perestroika, openness, restructuring. Wow, amazing time. 6 years later, there's no Soviet Union. It was gone because the process of reform went out of control. Because you open things up here, and then those people over there say, oh, great, openness. Well, actually, we don't want to be in your country anymore. Remember, you annexed us forcibly in 1940. We weren't happy about it. And so, when you open, and then the historical truth about the deaths of the people in the gulag and all of these other nasty things come out, and the regime loses its legitimacy. That's what happens when you have to have an admission of generation after generation of lie. I mean, lies that everyone knew, but no one was allowed to talk about. It's the same thing here. To undo a problem of that magnitude is not an easy thing. Now, the question arises, can this structure of power survive such disclosure? Often I think it can't, for the reasons that I've just sort of been elaborating here, but then again, I've learned to appreciate the power of spin that our power structure does have. They're very good. I think they may survive. It's possible that they could survive through effective spin on this disclosure, which just simply means that people like us have to be very vigilant if and when a truth comes out, an acknowledgement is made, which I think it will be in the next, 10 years. I think it'll happen. Not because they want it to happen, but because I think that the force of events are going to demand it. But they could survive through a spin, or even through the brutal imposition of a kind of global police state where you're microchipped and monitored 24/7. It's possible. There are forces that want this to happen. You don't need me to tell you this. There are forces on the other side, though. Those forces tell me that major change will come. Here's a nice little picture. The end of the world is near. Repent your sins. Well, I think it's obvious that change will come. We're living through, as I've been suggesting, an absolutely revolutionary age, unlike anything that human beings have ever gone through. I don't think there's ever been anything like this. And such change is going to breed instability. It's inevitable. It's happening now. We see it around us. And instability is going to provide not only opportunities, but I think the necessity for disclosure on this topic, which means that it may not be the end, but a beginning. I certainly think that's really possible. Now, I have one more slide, even though I'm told I have, 26 minutes remaining. Hey, we'll have time for questions and all of that. Although I expect to spend a fair amount of time on this last slide. So disclosure comes in the future, all right? Well, but then what? What actually is going to happen that's going to change us? I've been really asking myself this question lately. Are we ready for them? Are we ready for them? Well, I believe that many of the people who are here are a lot more ready for them than the people who are in the casino lobby right now. Okay? I don't mean to make fun. That's sick down there. We go through the lobby and these people are like this. The saliva's coming down the mouth. You see that? They're just standing there hitting this. What the hell are they doing there? So this is how you while away the golden years? I don't think so. Don't let this happen to me, please. If any of you see this happen to me, stop me. The problem is that our whole society is set up to prevent people from having any form of self-insight into who we are. We wake up, we go to our job, you do your thing, you come home, you turn on the TV, and you zone out. And that's not good. Because, by our nature, I don't think people have ever really wanted to sit quietly in a room and contemplate their life, because the fact is that when we do that, we realize how barren our lives often are. I'm not saying that yours is, but people will go through any kind of length to avoid contemplating who they are, what they are doing with their life. One of the favorite stories in my life that I've ever read, it's a classic story, and I'm sure some of you have read it. It's by Leo Tolstoy, called The Death of Ivan Ilyich. It's a great story, and I encourage you to read it this year. You should do it. It's not that long. And it's about this guy named Ivan Ilyich, and the story starts out with his death. Ivan Ilyich was this 19th century Russian version of a yuppie. So the story starts out, and he'd become a judge, and then he died. And there's a newspaper obituary of him. And Tolstoy, who was just an absolute genius at knowing what you thought. Tolstoy was a man who could crawl inside a human mind and really know it. There aren't many people with that gift. He had that gift. So the story starts out, these people are talking to each other. Oh, did you hear about poor Ivan Ilyich? Yeah, he died. That's such a shame. Yeah, he was a good guy. I'm going to miss him. And then what Tolstoy does, he takes you through their mind. So one guy's thinking, I got that card game tonight. Yeah, that's going to be good. Looking forward to that. Another guy's thinking, hey, now that he's dead, I actually might get that promotion. And on and on. But then what Tolstoy does is he takes you through the life of Ivan Ilyich. And what you find is that Ivan Ilyich was an intelligent man who things came kind of easily to him. So he went through school very well. He got married at a young age to the appropriate woman. Didn't really love her, but she was there, she was good, she was right for his situation. He became a lawyer, did very well at that. got promoted, had some kids, became a judge, got a promotion in the civil service, and as he's bought a new house, he's decorating his house in the manner that he wants, which happens to be the manner of all the other people of his social status. And he's hanging drapes, and he slips and he hits his back. And it hurts, but he says, well, you know, it's a good thing I was in such good shape, because I could have been really hurt. But it turns out he was, and he becomes sick. And he becomes bedridden eventually. Weeks go by. He sees one doctor, tells him one thing. He sees another doctor, tells him it's another. And he's thinking, what is wrong with me? And he's a horrible patient. He just complains nonstop. And his wife doesn't want to visit him in his room because he's such a cranky person. His daughter doesn't want to talk to him. And of course, they're totally superficial. And they're going out to the plays and the theater and all of this stuff. And he's thinking to himself, how can you want to go out to that stupid play? I'm here suffering. I'm in agony. And you're going out to the play? And then he realizes, oh, yeah, well, I used to do that, didn't I? Go to the bet on the horses and whatever. But then what Tolstoy does, this is really where his genius shines. You get toward the point. I'm not ruining this for you. You should read it anyway. And there's a moral here for what we're dealing with. He's writhing in agony, alone. He's miserable, and he's just horribly feeling, he's feeling awful. And feeling sorry for himself. And then he hears a voice. And the voice says, what do you want? And he's startled. He's like, well, there's no one else in the room. And what Tolstoy really is doing is that Ivan Ilyich is having conversation with his soul. He doesn't say that, but that's what it is. And he says, what do I want? I don't know. I want this pain to go away. And the voice says, oh, really? Are you sure that's what you want? Is there anything else that you want? He says, I don't know. I want to be happy, okay? And the voice says, all right, you want to be happy. Let's see when you were happy. Let's reflect on your life. When were you happy, Ivan? So then he thinks about his life. And he reflects and thinks that, well, I'm really not happy with my wife. I mean, she's really not very, very interesting. And my kids are just, they tell me about the kids. And I wasn't really happy even as a lawyer. I was happy, though, as a child with my family, the people who loved me and the people that I loved, who cared about me. And we didn't really have a lot of material possessions, but I was happy. So then, of course, comes the devastating blow. Tolstoy was always pitiless with truth. And Ivan Ilyich asks himself a question that won't go away. And the question is, what if I have lived my life wrong? Which, of course, he did. He did. He blew it. So that was the life of Ivan Ilyich. And why do I bring that up in this type of environment? Well, I think you can see. Because what we really need, more than salvation from our government in terms of a disclosure about all this, about all the technology that they're hiding, and they are hiding it, I believe. But what we really need is to look at the kinds of people that we are. Because if there's going to be a reality with these other beings, it's a reality that we're going to have to deal with. Not our super intelligent machine servants, but us. We're going to be dealing with them. And are we going to be ready to deal with them if we've been spending our time watching American Idol and the Super Bowl? I mean, really. And the problem is that our whole society is structured so that that's really all that we're encouraged to think about. That and just total selfish consumption for ourselves without really thinking about other people. Because if there's any one reason that we have to be here, it is to learn unconditional love for each other. It has to be. That's got to be, right? The thing that we have to learn. And if we don't learn that, we're not going to be ready to deal with any other advanced, spiritually advanced, or intellectually advanced species. The other thing that I would close by emphasizing is that we need to keep a cold eye, to a certain extent, on all of this. And I don't mean, turn into robots. I just mean a sense of detachment on what we're experiencing. Hope and fear are both problems, in the sense that, fear is easy to understand. Because when we fear the future, when we fear our situation, we become angry, we become insular, and we don't look at what's actually happening. But hope actually does the same thing, really does. Because if you're hoping, if you're basing what you believe on your hope, I hope that the ETs are good, I hope that my government knows what it's doing, then we're also kind of spinning out into a kind of fantasy, instead of understanding as objectively as we can the actual situation that we're confronting. We're doing everything except thinking about the situation we're in. And we need very much to think about that situation that we are in. We have to wake up, because even the most alert of us in this room, let's face it, we spend a lot of our times kind of asleep at the wheel. And that's probably not the best thing. We are in the most awe-inspiring moment in the history of our species. We are privileged to be alive at this time. But it also requires a responsibility, I like to think, on us to make ourselves into the best vehicles for moving this issue forward in the way it needs to be, for the sake of justice and for the sake of truth and for the sake of the future. So let's work to do that. And with that, I'd like to thank you for your time. We have, thank you. Looks like we have about 10 minutes remaining. If there are questions, I don't know what might be the best way to handle this. I can't really see anybody. Questions? Oh, if there are questions, right, that's it. We have a few minutes. If you want to come to this microphone, which is here, I think it's on, you can ask a question. Otherwise, maybe I answered all the questions that are there to exist. Probably everything's been dealt with, right? Oh, here we go.
Thank you first for this beautiful lecture. It was very enlightening. I have a question about the technology, since I'm in that field myself. I don't quite understand where all this leads to, because you're talking about the secret space program. So here we have this incredible technology, supposedly, from the ET. What are we doing with it? Where is it? Where's the payoff? In other words, well, if I'm a big corporation and I have this thing in my tips, do I make a profit out of it? We don't see anything in a public domain really directly connected to that. At least do we know?
Right, it's a fair question. What are we doing with the technology? Well, I've suspected, as I indicated, that I think some of it is being used in a secret space program. I think it's likely that it is. I also think that there are all kinds of spin-offs that have probably made it into the mainstream, but it's impossible to, for example, if a private corporation developed various patents out of technology that was originally extraterrestrial, how would you know that it was extraterrestrial to begin with? I suspect that there are a number of breakthroughs that have been made that derived from possession of extraterrestrial artifacts. This is certainly a claim that was made by people such as Philip Corso. Corso got a bad rap primarily because of his co-authorship of the book that he wrote. I think Corso himself was very truthful in the things that he said. He talked about things like high tensile fibers and laser technology, things of this particular sort that were developed, at least in part, as a result of that. So I think that that's a big part of what you're saying. Now, is there revolutionary technology? Well, yes, I think there is. The Nellis video shows an object that is doing things that really are not supposed to be possible. Now, where are the commercial applications? That's a fair question. I don't know the answer to that because I'm not seeing it, ordinarily either. But there are a number of other cases I didn't even bother to bring up. There's the Norton Air Force Base demonstration of 1988, an object that was seen as a flying saucer in a hangar at Norton Airfield with video demonstration of this object taking off and zipping out. It seemed to be one of our flying saucers. Now, that's 1988. I have the same perplexity. Why would these not be used in warfare, for example?
Well, exactly.
I don't know all the answers to that.
And that's a good example because we're talking about the Manhattan Project. It didn't take very long between the use of that technology that we developed, well, supposedly, and the use of it.
Right.
And now we have 60 years, and we're at war, and I'm still using F-16 and maybe the stealth
Yes, I
bomber,
know. There's
which was
absolutely-
invented 25 years ago.
Well, right. I don't know every answer. I wish I did.
Wonderful presentation, thank you. I noticed that you said up here that we should all wake up and that we should work together to try to deal with the ET presence. You didn't mention how or what it was that we're supposed to be doing.
I didn't mention who?
You didn't mention how we're supposed to deal with the ET presence? What is it we're supposed to do?
We have to know what we're dealing with first.
Right.
Okay. We have to have knowledge. But the point that I'm making is that we are going to be, whatever that truth is, we're going to be incapable if we confront them as the civilization, culture that we are right now. All right? We are not, as a rule, I mean, maybe 1% of the people might be able to deal with this. We do not have, I mean, maybe you disagree. Maybe you feel that there's a higher level of awareness and maturity in the world population than I think there is. So if that's so, then yeah, you've got a valid point, but I tend to think that we've got a fairly low level of understanding right now.
Richard, can you comment on the Norwegian politician's email to Project Camelot?
Did all of you hear that? Making the rounds has been a communication from a politician from Norway who's been in touch with Bill Ryan and Kerry Cassidy of Project Camelot about the proliferation of massive underground bases and facilities for elites in this world to go to and hide out and live when there is a planetary catastrophe that is believed to be coming here in just about 4 years from now, in 2012. And I don't know. How can I comment on this? I have no way of knowing if this is true, no more than any of you do. If it's true, then if we're here to die, because most of us, I assume, would not be in with the in crowd, then we die. And that's the end. People live, people die. Civilizations rise, they fall. I don't want that to happen, but if it does, then it does. That's that. Yes, Miles.
Just on that particular point, Terry Toftanis, who's an award-winning videographer, who's won an EBE award at this conference, his parents live in the area of concern from the Norwegian politicians' bases.
Yes.
He says there are lots of bases in Norway. There's no big deal about it.
Right.
But there are people in Europe who are preparing areas to survive if necessary.
Yeah. My only complaint about this theory is the cause that's said to be behind it, which is this planet X that's supposed to be passing by us somehow. I have a hard time understanding how, astronomically speaking, that could be the case, and how it would be not detected, how it would not affect the gravitational orbits of the planets of the solar system. That does not make sense to me. I have a very difficult time with that. Now, the fact that there are these bases underground, there's no real legitimate question against that. I think that's true. There are many of these bases. I think that research is very good. As far as preparing for a planet-wide catastrophe, yes, of course, it's possible. Look at what we are right now. Whether there's a planet X or not, we're not in a long-term stable situation. We're really not. So there could be a lot of elites who are in the know who are getting ready to hunker down. Whether it's a planet X thing or not, I'm personally dubious about that. Yes?
Hi, Richard. My name's Neil. From the UK. I just finished a stint with the UK military as a captain in the Royal Marines. And I wanted to support your statement at the end about opening up our hearts to unconditional love and forgiveness. From my personal experience of operations in Afghanistan, as well as experiences with negative entities, both incarnate and discarnate, our only true defense is that of unconditional love and forgiveness. There's no higher power than that. Whatever technologies some of these negative entities are concocting, they cannot overcome that power of unconditional love, which is straight from the source.
I appreciate you saying that very much, and thank you. Thank you. I've never, ever talked like this in a conference, ever. But I did it very intentionally because it's so important, and this is the place to do it. So, yes, you have a question, sir?
Yes, setting the Planet X aside for a moment and entertaining the possibility of a supposed coronal mass ejection. Do you have any comments on that possibility?
Yeah. These are things that I have no better way of talking about it than anybody else here. A coronal mass ejection is not something that I can control or that you can control or that we can prevent. As far as I know, I don't think our science is up to that yet. So if that happens, that's akin to the asteroid that wiped out the dinosaurs. That's a natural disaster, and it's possible. Anything is possible. How likely it is, my instinct is to say that it's not likely just because it hasn't happened to the extent of wiping out our species yet. Millions of years of hominids have been here. So I'm inclined to think that we'll dodge that bullet. I hope we do. There's hope for you. Yes? One more. Looks like we have one more question.
The tape's all done, Richard, but in light of the fact that we've all seen in our lifetimes so much space junk fall out of the sky with no one ever knowing where it was going to land, what did we shoot down with what and why last week?
Can't you people ask easy questions? Okay, thank you. Well, as I said, this reality it's the elephant in our living room. It's so big. So therefore, we have to assume that it has a very large secret footprint on our history and on our society. We have to assume that. We'd be fools if we thought anything else. So that there have to be many, many examples that are ufologically related to our actual history that have just never been recorded. And a lot of these, I am convinced, have had to do with the space program. And so, yes, I mean, I wondered this as well. Probably we all did. I would think in that instance that there's always a way for inside information to come out. And so it's still recent enough that we're not getting enough information out. I have a feeling that even within a few months or a year, it is quite possible that something else might be learned about that. So let's just wait and see. And with that, I think that's everything. So thank you. I will be available at my table for the next few days. I'm leaving on Wednesday morning, so I'll be here, though, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. So please come by, chat with me. I'll have my books and DVDs and all that good stuff, and I'll be here to talk. So thank you. Have a nice evening. Thanks.